see that this is part of the explosion here, and you can delineate the shadow from the non-shadow. So much of what we see back here, what we should see back here, we can't see because the sunlight is not illuminating that. Yes, CBS is aware of this. Yes, the AMA is aware of this, or the Journal of the American Medical Association, Lundberg, and all the rest. They know this, but they don't tell you that. But when the president is struck, watch the direction of travel. The president is thrown to the rear and to the left. Completely on axis, exactly on axis with a shot from the grassy knoll, but totally inconsistent with a shot from behind from the Texas School Book Depository. The motorcycle riders that were to the rear of the president back here were struck by material, brain, blood, bone, skull. One was hit so hard, so radically, that he himself thought he had been shot. Such was the nature of this particular impact. Now this, once again, is frame 312 of the Zapruder film, the last frame before the fatal headshot. Notice the angle of the president here. Slightly to his left, slightly forward, but still erect. It's a photograph. It's not retouched, it's not altered. This is fact. This was available to the Warren Commission. But they had their artist, Mr. Rydberg, make a slight alteration. We now no longer have the president's head like this, it's now like this, to allow the downward angle from the depository. This is essentially totally dishonest. They're making the wounds fit through what I call verbal plastic surgery. But even these morons didn't have it right, because the bullet was traveling right to left from the depository. They're showing a bullet going left to right. Even their own phony evidence doesn't back what they're trying to say. Where was the president struck in the rear of the head? This is a key point. Key point. According to the Warren Commission, according to the autopsy, according to every bit of evidence we were told at the time, the president is struck in the back just above the hairline. Until we get to the House Assassinations Committee. Somebody, by the time the House Assassinations Committee was in session, realized that there was a serious problem with a bullet coming downward from the 6th floor of the depository, striking here and exiting all the way up here. So the House Committee came up with the most incredible alteration of all. They moved the entrance wound up 100 millimeters to the cowlick area in the rear of the president's head. Arbitrarily. In absolute opposition to the testimony of Commander Humes, and we are told that there is an entrance wound right here. I defy you, any of you, or Professor Blakey, or any of the medical panel of the House Assassinations Committee, to come here and show me where an entrance wound is in the cowlick area. You can't, because it doesn't exist. It wasn't there. Yes, there's a piece of dried blood on the top of the scalp here, but there's no entrance wound, except possibly where it was originally placed in the autopsy, here just above the hairline. According to every single doctor in Parkland, every one, even the ones that are now changing their stories, in their original statements on the day of the assassination, every doctor, every nurse, Mrs. Kennedy herself that day, all of them, every single witness in Dealey Plaza, and you'll see some of them, everyone that related to the head wound, everyone said that the rear of the head was blasted out. Many of them said that the wound was large enough for a grown man to stick a fist through. They examined the wound in Parkland Hospital. Tomorrow, I beg that all of you be here for Dr. Wecht and Dr. Crenshaw. Hear them talk about this. This is incredibly important. For this photograph, the one single solitary piece of evidence that the House Assassinations Committee and the Clark panel and the Rockefeller Commission all based, and even going back to the Warren Commission, all based their conclusion that no shot struck from the front. The one piece of evidence is this. When we look at this photograph, from there you may be able to see it. Do you notice the difference in contrast between the internal part here and the external part? Can you see a delineation here between what goes above and what comes behind? Can you see a total lack of any detail in here? I can. The rear of somebody else's head has been superimposed photographically into the back of the president to make it look as if there was no damage to the rear of the head. Well, I made this discovery in 1977, and I wrote a formal memo to Professor Blakey and the photographic panel and the medical panel of the House Assassinations Committee. I was the staff photographic consultant. I had the right to do that, and I did. And I made the observation. I sent copies of the testimony and the reports of all the doctors from Parkland that I was able to find within the Warren Commission volumes. And I said, how can you have this list, this shopping list here, and have a photograph that shows the rear of the head to be totally intact? We have a real problem here. Let's try to resolve it. Let's fly some of the autopsy pictures down to the doctors in Dallas and let them comment on this. Seems like a reasonable request. But Professor Blakey said, no, we can't do that. I said, why not? He said, well, suppose there was an airplane crash and the pictures got destroyed. I said, well, don't send the originals. Send duplicates. I said, well, suppose there was an accident and they survived. They didn't get destroyed, but they blew all over the place and they ended up in the National Enquirer. That's the end of the world? I said, look, if that bothers you, why not find 3 or 4 of the key doctors from Texas, fly them up to the National Archives, show them the originals there, see what they've got to say. Oh, we can't do that. Why not? It's too expensive. They had $5 million. They were getting bargain rates from every airline in the country, and they couldn't afford to fly 3 doctors up for 1,500 miles to take a look and resolve the most important single question that they could ever answer. They had already disagreed with my proposal to exhume the president's body. Why not do this? Why not find if the doctors will back these photographs? If they do, fine. We'll go home. But suppose they challenge them. That's the one thing that Blakey could not allow. So for 2.5 years, he refused to do it. And at the end of it all, I was so pissed off that I did what he did not do. Myself and my ex-co-author went all around the country. We found as many of the doctors as we could, and we showed them this photograph, and we showed them a drawing that was done by one of the doctors that you'll see in a moment. And every single one of them said that this is not the way the president's head looked. Every one of them. They all describe a massive hole in the back of the head. Something's wrong there, gang, and we've got to resolve this. We showed it to Dr. Peters. We showed it to many of the doctors. We asked them, where was the wound in the president's head, the large wound? And Dr. Peters told us. Nothing to hide. Dr. Delaney, same thing. Most important, Dr. Robert McClellan, the man who was standing closest to that wound, standing right there for the entire time that the president's body was on the table. He described it for us. And by the way, you'll see all of these doctors on videotape saying just what they saw in their own words at the finish of the slides. But beyond just showing us, Dr. McClellan drew us a picture. In 1966, not now, 29 years later, but a mere 3 years after the assassination, from his own personal remembrances. He drew this for Josiah Thompson for his book, 6 Seconds in Dallas. By the way, if you're ever able to find it, it's an excellent book. But this was the size, the nature, and the location of the wound. We showed the Dallas doctors this, and we showed the Dallas doctors the photograph. Every single one of them, without exception, said that this was accurate and the photograph was not. If I could do it, why couldn't Blakey? Is there photographic evidence that backs the hypothesis? I mean, maybe all the doctors were wrong. Maybe 30 trained medical people are all wrong. Maybe all the witnesses were wrong. The hell they were wrong. This is the Zapruder film, frame 312, the frame before the headshot. The rear of the head totally intact. The original rear line of the president's head. And then frame 335. After the president has been pushed to the rear of the seat and bounced forward, Zapruder finally gets a clear frame of the president, and this is what we see. This area up here is Mrs. Kennedy's shoulder. This rough, irregular, darker area is what's left of the top of the president's head. This area here in front of the right ear, in spite of the ravings of 1 or 2 lunatics out there, not out here, but in other places that have written recent books, saying that this has been retouched. That's ridiculous. It's not retouched. There's a pivot point right here, this slightly darker area, which is a hinge, where a piece of skull flap has come downward. It is sopping wet, and the sun is reflecting off of it right into the camera, making it appear as a flaring effect. Right in front of the ear. But most importantly in this incredible photograph is the rear of the president's head blasted to the rear in a volcano shape, a shape that was not there just a moment earlier. Completely consistent with the picture drawn by Dr. McClellan. The location, identical. The size, identical. Verification of his memory. How does the House Assassinations deal with this? Oh, you'll get a kick out of this one, gang. This is what the doctors all saw, beyond question. Dr. Crenshaw, who was there, will tell you this tomorrow. He will explain his personal remembrances about this. That's what existed. But this is what the autopsy photograph pretends to show. And by the way, the piece that was reflecting off of the side of the president's head just a moment ago, this part here it is in the actual autopsy photograph. This is the piece. It's not retouched. It was there. But the House Assassinations Committee had now gotten themselves involved. You know the old story, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. Well, they did it. They told us there was an entrance wound up here. Well, it's not there. So once again, they decide not to present the autopsy photographs to us. Instead, they hire their own artist, Ida Docks, an excellent military illustrator. Medical illustrator. And they have her do a, quote, photographic likeness of that picture. It's close, but not close enough, because they had her do something that was not there. They had her draw in an entrance wound in the cowlick area that is not in the photograph. Here's blow-ups. This is her picture that she drew with a deep, dark wound with margins and borders. We're looking into an empty skull here. The actual photograph shows hair growing out of the same area. Yeah, there's a margin of dried blood through here, but it's intact. And what of the x-rays? What of the x-rays? According to the x-rays of President Kennedy, every piece of skull from the front of the forehead to above the ear and from the top of the head to in front of the ear is missing. It's all gone. There's nothing left. A massive hole in the x-ray, but not in the photograph. The photograph shows this whole area to be totally intact. There isn't even damage beneath the skin here. There is no damage in that area in the photograph. All of this area through here, the eye, all of this should be missing if the x-ray is accurate. It's not. The photographs and the x-rays don't even match each other. And neither of them match what the doctors saw. This is key. The issue of the rear of the head as it appears in the Zapruder film with that avulsed volcano shape in the back of the head. Is there any confirmation of this elsewhere? You bet there is. This morning you heard people talking about the Nix film. These are two frames from the Nix film. This is the frame that corresponds to the rear of the president's head at the moment of the shot, as it's about to strike, and 1/18 of a second later, as we see the explosion to the front of the president's head, to the rear, all of this through here, this whole new area to the rear of the head is blasted out between here and here, exactly the same in the Nix film as the Zapruder film, and at the exact moment of the impact on the president's head. This is the autopsy photograph of the rear of the head in color. It has not yet been released in color. A bootleg version of it has been shown. But this is the back of the president's head. There is dried blood here. There is no other damage. Here's that piece of skull I was telling you about that reflected the sunlight into the camera and what have you. This picture actually should be this way, sideways, but it's easier to get a bearing about it this way. Here's the original entrance wound, and here's the president's neck. As you can see, there is no damage to it whatsoever. This piece of bone is known as the Harper fragment. It is found by a young man named Billy Harper at a point 35 feet to the rear and left of the impact on the president's head. His uncle was a forensic pathologist. He took the bone to the uncle. The uncle examined it, said it was a piece of human occipital bone. The occipital bone, for those of you who are not med students, is that little area around the back of the head, you can feel it if you like, where that bump is. That bump is called the external occipital protuberance. That area is what fits against this bone. And that's what was blown out of the back of the president's head. For those of you who want to know the size, this is 2.5 inches across. And is only one of the several fragments that were blasted out. Upon the president being struck, Mrs. Kennedy, in a shock, panic reaction, and with no memory, by the way, she doesn't remember even doing this, turns around, climbs out onto the back of the car, braces herself with her left hand, her elbow down on the car, her feet still in the car. Now remember the official story we were told? She was trying to haul out of there, she was trying to get away. Where would she go? She wasn't trying to escape. Oh no, she wasn't trying to escape. She was trying to help the Secret Service driver, the Secret Service follow-up guy, Clint Hill from the follow-up car, jump onto the back of the car. She was trying to help him on. Well, she never turns around to look. She has no way of knowing he's coming. What she was doing was bracing herself, reaching out and picking up a piece of the president's head that was blown to the rear, was lying on the trunk of the car, and she brought it back into the car, trying to fix it, trying to make it better somehow. And this panic, shock reaction. When the car gets to Parkland Hospital and the president is taken into emergency room 1, they're trying to save his life, Mrs. Kennedy comes through the swinging doors and she says, she finds Dr. Jenkins and nudges him with her elbow and says, "Here, doctor, will this help?" She opens up her hand, still holding that piece of the president's head in her hands. Once again, it was blown to the rear, a shot from the front. Well, what did Mrs. Kennedy have to say about all of this? For those of you who were able to find the Warren Commission volumes, if you're so lucky to find them, find volume 5. Look at Mrs. Kennedy's own testimony. When you look for it, you'll see this line. I was trying to, but someone yelling, but just down holding him, period. And then, not separated by any lines or any space, not in italics, not in bold letters, a little point saying, reference to wounds deleted. Well, that fascinated me for years. I wanted to know. What could she possibly testify about that was more important? The fact that it was a warm day and she felt uncomfortable, and that she looked at the shadows of the underpass and it looked cool and she couldn't wait to get underneath the underpass to cool off. What does that matter? What matters is what she observed, what we were not allowed to see. It took me 8 years to get this out of the National Archives, but finally it was declassified. And this is what she said. I was trying to hold his hair on and his skull on. From the front there was nothing. I suppose there must have been. But from the back, you could see, you know, you were trying to hold his hair on and his skull on. Let me paraphrase. From the back, you were trying to hold his skull on. She described the exact same wound that all of the doctors did. And yet the government has the incredible nerve to tell us, after 29 years, that there was no damage to the back of the president's head, in spite of what every one of the doctors recollected. And they have the nerve to tell us that the doctors were merely wrong. They weren't wrong. And I think that more than virtually anything else galls me, that these so-called government experts who weren't there are telling the people who were there that they were wrong. Governor Connolly was holding a Texas-style Stetson hat in his hand. We are told he only suffered one wound, one bullet, all the wounds from one bullet. Bullet coming down, striking his back, blah, 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 as I mentioned before. This is Zapruder frame 274. It is taken a full 3 seconds after the governor was hit in the back. Governor Connolly is still holding that Stetson hat in his hand. The bullet that eventually did strike his wrist severed the tendon to the thumb. He had no opposing thumb. He could not hold the hat. Yet here he is. And beyond that, considering the seriousness of that wound to his wrist, this should be bathed in blood, his cuff. Not a single drop of blood anywhere to be seen. What does this mean? Governor Connolly was hit by more than one bullet. But because extra bullets could not be accounted for, the government created the myth of the single bullet theory. And this is as much a part of it as the impossibility of the bullet going through both men. At frame 312, we see how President Kennedy is sitting. We also see how Governor Connolly is sitting. He has been hit, he's been wounded, he is losing consciousness. He is going into shock. He no longer has full consciousness. When you listen to his testimony, you hear him say, "It felt like a doubled over fist striking me in the back." But he was unaware until after he regained consciousness in Parkland Hospital that he even had a wrist wound or a thigh wound. Why? Because they didn't happen at the same time. 0.6 seconds, just a little over a half a second, after President Kennedy is hit in the head and thrown to the rear, Governor Connolly is thrown forward, like so. We'll go back and forth. Boom. Violent move forward. In a third of a second. External force applied to the governor. In between... I'm sorry? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, well, I think he'd rather say something else. From that point to this point, Governor Connolly is further thrown forward till he's lying face down in his wife's lap. Warren Commission had the Zapruder film. What I, as an individual, can discover, they and all the FBI experts available to them certainly could have discovered on their own. But they elected not to. The Warren Commission as a body never saw the Zapruder film. Certain members did. Some members actually saw it, believe it or not, more than once. The single most important piece of evidence, the visual record, was virtually ignored, as was something like 85% of the photographic evidence available in the Kennedy case. Most of which was discovered by an independent researcher named Richard Sprague, not the same one that was the head of the House Assassinations Committee, but a different one, on an independent investigation of his own, working for Life magazine. Life published individual frames of many of those things. Those films have not been seen by the public. You'll see many of them today. I'll show them to you. But that evidence, which was so critical to the investigation, was ignored completely by the Warren Commission. The central point during the shooting, the first volley of shots has happened. The president has been struck. The governor has been struck. People are now becoming aware that a shooting is going on. Here's Mrs. Kennedy's white-gloved hand supporting her husband's wrist. Here's the president's hand. Much of his face is obliterated by the mirror that's attached inside the car. Here's Governor Connolly. He's lying back now, starting to lie back. Man in the doorway up here, by the way, who was identified originally as possibly being Lee Harvey Oswald, is in fact Billy Lovelady, a man who looked so much like Lee Harvey Oswald that a week before the assassination, Lovelady's wife came to the depository, saw Oswald across the floor, called him over thinking it was her husband. The two men were virtually twins. But in any case, there is no damage at this point to the windshield of the car. But a few moments later, the same photographer takes his next frame, and now we see the sun reflecting off of damage that's done to the inside of the windshield, right by the antenna. Later that afternoon, a photograph is taken officially by the Secret Service, and it shows where a fragment of a bullet, probably from the one that struck Governor Connolly in the right wrist and shattered, went on to hit this area of the window right by the mirror. Here's some blood from Governor Connolly's wrist. But beyond that, and even perhaps more important, is the evidence of another bullet, an intact bullet, striking the inner aspect of the chrome frame around the windshield. Of the chrome frame around the windshield. A House Assassinations Committee photographic panel, although you can read the volumes from the beginning to end, you'll never find a reference to this. I can tell you it happened because I learned about it from them directly in closed session. Fitted a Carcano bullet into that hole. That was a perfect fit for a bullet that was even close to the size of the Carcano bullet. During the last day of the public hearings before the House Assassinations Committee, Congressman, now Senator Christopher Dodd, made the most important revelation. He stood up, or sat up, and asked Professor Blakey to answer him one question. And he said, "Mr. Blakey, will you please explain to me about the bullet that was found in the president's limousine that cannot be ballistically matched to the Oswald weapon?" Congressman Dodd never received an answer. To this day, he has not received an answer. I want to know about a bullet recovered in the car that cannot be ballistically matched to the weapon. And I think Blakey should have wanted to know too. That bullet could have been the one that fell down after hitting that point on the windshield, above the windshield. What about other bullets that missed? This photograph is taken about 5 minutes after the shooting. It's in Dealey Plaza. Elm Street goes right along here. This is a little patch of cement with a manhole cover in the middle. And the police are paying immediate attention to this point. Why? What are they looking at? They are looking at a bullet mark. Look. There it is. A bullet mark that struck right by the manhole cover during the shooting. There were a lot of witnesses that were aware of it. Several of those witnesses have been interviewed by some of us here in this room. The researcher is doing very fine work. police were immediately interested in this. Why? This is Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters, Dallas policeman. They're obviously interested in something that's going on here. The clock on the roof of the depository tells us it's 12:39, a mere 8 minutes after the shooting. Already the police, so concerned with preserving evidence, are allowing the traffic to come through the plaza. But these two characters are standing right by where that manhole cover was, that area of cement. And they're looking at something in the grass. What are they looking at? According to the photographer who took these pictures, I'll show you a picture of him. He's right here. They're looking at a bullet, a large caliber bullet, lying in the grass. There was a furrow leading toward this area in the dirt. But as Buddy Walters leans forward to pick it up, whatever it is, this man comes in from the right. Obviously he's got some clout because he has shown deference by both the police and the sheriff's office. They back up and allow him to reach down into the grass. Whatever it is, he picks it up, holds it in his hand. The time on the clock appears now 12:40, 9 minutes after the shoot, so it's a tight period of time. He puts it in his pocket and walks into history. As with the bullet found in the car, as with the bullet removed from the president's body during the autopsy, this bullet also, 29 years later, has not been put into evidence. 3 additional shots that cannot be accounted for. And physical bullets. Where did that bullet come from? Well, given the angle of the shot, it certainly couldn't have come from the Oswald window. The only physical structure that's in line with that shot is the Dallas Records building. Another bullet missed. This is one the Warren Commission did get forced to deal with. Probably the biggest thorn in their side was a man who was standing by the underpass. A bullet struck this point 40 feet to the east of the underpass. And now the man who destroys their entire theory, James Tague. Before James Tague was known, the official version was the first bullet hit the president, hitting him in the back. The second bullet hit Governor Connolly, and the third bullet hit President Kennedy in the head. That was it. 3 bullets. They're locked into it. James Tague was hit by one of those 3 bullets. Since one of the bullets hit the president in the head, killing him, all of the additional shots had to come from the 3rd bullet. That's why the single bullet theory existed. Tague, standing here by the underpass, was struck on the cheek either by a fragment of the bullet or a fragment of concrete that was caused to fly up from the bullet, and that changed the history of the case. That one little nick on the cheek. Such little trivialities. Had Tague been standing an inch or 2 to the left, or an inch or 2 to the right, it would make all the difference. There's other damage to the sidewalk on Elm Street, the north sidewalk. There is some question as to whether this is a bullet mark or not. I tend to think it is. If it is, it came from the depository, not from the Oswald end, so-called Oswald end, but from the opposite end. And later on, we'll see why this is so critically important at this time. For after the shooting, a great deal of attention was paid to the Texas School Book Depository, not by the witnesses who were there, but by the police. Notably, the 6th floor, so-called sniper's nest, gun rest, we are told. Notice how high the window was open only to half of the full height. When the police got up there, they discovered what is called a sniper's nest. Sniper's nest. We're told Lee Harvey Oswald built this all by his lonesome. From the size of this would have taken a considerable amount of time to do. Are we supposed to believe that with all the workers that were up there, nobody saw him do this? If I were his boss and I saw a book carton stacked this way, I'd have fired his rear end on the spot. But we're told he did it, and nobody saw him do it. Nobody cared that he was doing it. What you doing, Lee? Oh, really, you snipers. That's okay. See you after lunch. Around the other side of the sniper's nest here, shown by the Warren Commission, the gun rests. 3 cartons, 1, 2, 3, on top of each other. Great! Logical. Except it doesn't match the photographs taken from the street below. Oh, okay, no problem. We have another version of it. Here you go. That better? Yeah, it's better. Thanks. Out of all of these cartons, all of which were supposed to have been assembled by Lee Harvey Oswald into the sniper's nest, out of all of these, there's not one fingerprint of Lee Harvey Oswald. There is a sole palm print at this point on a piece of cardboard that has here been pasted back onto the box. Interesting. How did Oswald sneak the rifle into the building? Well, Gus, you and I have spoken to Bill Wesley Frazier, the man who drove Oswald to the depository that morning. Mr. Frazier testified to the Warren Commission that Oswald was carrying a package, and that he asked Oswald, what do you have in the package? Lee said, curtain rods. Yeah. Well, the Warren Commission ignored and discounted this to be curtain rod story, but I have 2 photographs of Mrs. Earlene Roberts, his landlady, hanging curtain rods in Oswald's room the afternoon of the assassination. That does fit. But we're told that Oswald smuggled this rifle into the depository. Of course, nobody saw him. I guess it got lost with all the other people that were bringing rifles into the depository that day or that week. And there wasn't more than one. We're told that Oswald snuck this little package into the depository. And the rifle was in the bag. A couple of problems here. The rifle had lots of gun oil on it. Not a single drop of gun oil anywhere within the bag. Not one. Not a trace. Not a single contour of the fold to the bag matches the contour of the rifle. And even broken down into its 2 component parts, the stock and the main body of the weapon, making it as small as possible, the rifle was still longer than Oswald's arm. Mr. Frazier's testimony then and now was that when Oswald carried the bag into the depository, he was resting between his armpit and his rifle bag. He was carrying it in like this. With the rifle being longer than his arm, he simply could not have done that. This is an amazing photograph. Amazing photograph. I love this photograph. This photograph may kill the whole government story. It was taken by an Army intelligence officer by the name of James Powell. It was taken 30 seconds after the shooting. Oswald's co-workers on the 5th floor, some of them are still there. Bonnie Ray Williams, James Jordan, Harold Norman. 30 seconds after the shooting, we see the Oswald quotes window. When we come in closer on it, say, wow, pretty clear. Yes. And here we see the sniper's nest. Yeah. Consistent. But then something was wrong. Something the government did not want us to see. And that's the reason why this picture was suppressed for 15 years, held back by the FBI, not released until the House Assassinations Committee demanded it. Because next to the boxes is a shape that goes back into the shadows. A shape that is the wrong color, the wrong shape, the wrong texture to be a box. 30 seconds after the shooting, there is still somebody in the Oswald window. And it's not Lee Harvey Oswald. From the point that this picture was taken, Oswald has a mere 42 seconds to get down to the second floor lunchroom where he is seen calmly drinking a Coca-Cola in the lunchroom. But what does he have to do in the interim? He has to run across the entire 6th floor like a broken field runner, dodging boxes and stacks of boxes, going around the sniper's desk without tipping over the gun rest. Go all the way across the 6th floor, stop, wipe his fingerprints off the rifle completely, reach over the boxes, hide it, standing up on its edge, go to the extreme opposite diagonal end, go down 4 flights of stairs, passing Victoria Adams and another woman, both of which testified that nobody passed them. And one can only imagine on which floor he has to stop to get out the exact change to buy himself a Coca-Cola in the 2nd floor lunchroom. Because 72 to 90 seconds after the shooting, Oswald is seen by Marion Baker, Dallas police officer, and Roy Truly, the superintendent of the depository. Calm, not out of breath. 2nd floor lunchroom. Could he do it? No. Dan Rather said he could. Yeah, you try watching the 1964 special where Rather does this, and watch how they're running the film in fast motion to get him down fast enough with their little clock ticking. And that doesn't allow for the 30 seconds because of the photograph between that and half. The Powell photograph would show somebody there 32 seconds later. Rather said you could do it just under 90 seconds. Great! But he doesn't have 90 seconds anymore. He never did. Anyway, Oswald leaves the depository. Next time we really see him for sure is at 1026 North Beckley, the Oak Cliff section of Dallas. Oswald goes in the front door. When you've seen JFK, the room that Oswald goes to, when you see him walking across the floor, that actually is the door to where his room was. It's a closet. He was living in a closet. It was so small that when the scenes were shot for the movie with Oswald lying in the bed, getting his jacket and all that, it was shot in a larger room in the same house. That's how small the room was. Anyway, Mrs. Roberts is in the house and says something isn't all about the president. She said Oswald muttered something back. And while Oswald is in the house, a horn beeps outside the rooming house. Mrs. Roberts looks out and she sees Dallas police car. She takes out the number 1 and the number 0. She wasn't sure if it was a third number or not. Number 10. Well, car that drives away. Oswald comes out in front of the house. The last time Mrs. Roberts sees him, he's standing here by the bus stop, heading back toward downtown Dallas. Major problem here, guys. Officer J.D. Tippett, the man who is driving car 10, is shot to death 0.8 of a mile in the opposite direction. About 4 minutes later. Officer Tippett, who had failed to report in for the previous 2 assigned reporting times, man who was not even supposed to be in that area of Oak Cliff, is shot to death, we are told, by Lee Harvey Oswald. On what evidence? Every single one of the so-called government witnesses originally said it was not Oswald. Every one of them. Including this fabulous witness. Her name is Aquila Clemens. Aquila Clemens was not called by the Warren Commission. was not called by anyone. But she was talking about what she saw. Mark Lane and Amelia Antonio, in their landmark, although poorly produced, but thank goodness it exists, documentary, Rush to Judgment, interviewed Mrs. Clemens, the only recorded interview with her, and several other key witnesses, most of them, if not all of them, are not dead. Mrs. Clemens said she saw two people shoot Officer Tippett. The man with the gun, the man who actually fired, she said, was a stocky man with close cropped curly hair, somewhat short. And after he shot Tippett, he waved to the other man, go on, run. And they went off in different directions. Mrs. Clemens was approached by the authorities and told her that if she didn't want to be hurt, she'd better keep her mouth shut. She did not. Talked to Mark Lane. No one has seen the Chloe Clemens since about 1966. She disappeared on the face of the earth. Another witness, Harold Williams, spoke to Mark. He was so afraid to talk, he did it on a Sunday morning at an abandoned construction site, or it wasn't actually abandoned, there was no one there on a Sunday. And he told what he saw, which related to seeing Jack Ruby and Officer Tippett together. Mark Lane attempted to talk to Harold Williams after the interview, could never reach him. Couldn't find him, but a dog found Harold Williams. Well, not exactly Harold Williams, his head, which had been severed from the body. Is it any wonder so many witnesses have remained silent for all of these years? Lee Harvey Oswald is found in the Texas Theater in Oak Cliff. A man by the name of John Calvin Brewer, who was working in a shoe store some doors down, saw a man acting rather suspiciously coming into the front area of his store, looking through the windows, acting suspiciously as the police cars were cruising up and down, sirens blaring down Jefferson Avenue. As the sirens got a little farther away, this man snuck out of the doorway and headed down toward the Texas Theater. Well, Mr. Brewer is a very nice guy. For years I thought it was part of the cover. Jane, you found out what he did. And John Brewer told us stories, told us facts that we never knew before. He was never interacted. Except for an afternoon talk with him. He said the reason why he was drawn to Lee Harvey Oswald is not because he knew about the president being shot or anything like that. But Oswald had been there a week earlier, was the biggest pain in the ass customer he'd ever had. He said he tried on every pair of shoes in the store, gave him a real hard time, and that's why he remembered. And we saw him in the doorway again. He was thinking to himself, oh no, not again. But then Oswald, we are told it's Oswald, it may have been somebody who looked like Oswald, we're not even sure of that. Ben leaves and goes into the Texas Theater. We are told without paying. But Butch Burroughs, who was the manager of the theater then and was up until a few months ago when the theater finally closed down in bankruptcy, saw Oswald at the candy counter with a ticket stuck in his hand. And before the shooting of Tippett. Timeline. Last year, several Dallas police files were opened. I was honored to be called down the first day of the release of the files. I was allowed to go through them, and I found the most interesting document. It is an arrest record for Oswald saying he was arrested in the second floor balcony. It's very interesting because the official version is that Oswald was arrested on the first floor, up 5 rows from the rear of the theater. Maybe somebody was arrested on the second floor. Maybe it was Lee Harvey Oswald. But Butch Burroughs and another witness both said that somebody was arrested going into the back alley and was thrown into a police car in the back alley. Oswald was taken out in front. There was a very real probability that there was more than one arrest made the theater that day. John Calvin Brewer. Movies on the screen. Brewer's waiting on the right-hand side of the theater, in the back. There are entrances to the alley, out that side. Brewer hears some commotion out the back. He opens up the door a little bit, and a hand comes in, grabs him out, throws him against the wall, frisks him. He says, "No, it's not me. The man you want is still inside." So the police follow him into the theater. They walk out on the stage like this. The movie keeps running. It doesn't stop. The lights come on in the theater. Brewer stands with the police. He looks out, says to the police, "That is the man you want. He's the one I saw come in." So the police hop off the stage, moving down both aisles at the same time, telling people to get out of the way. And they approach, finally, Lee Harvey Oswald, giving him every chance to run. And you watch that warning shot, guys, it'll get you every time. And Oswald didn't run. Oswald stands up and says, "This is it. I am not resisting arrest." Nick McDonald, policeman, comes up with a gun to Oswald. Oswald knocks the gun out of his hand and flattens him on his butt. Oswald is jumped by several policemen, and in the only known photograph of Oswald being arrested, here he is in the theater, being arrested, taken down to the ground. Incredible photograph. As he's arrested, witnesses hear a policeman say, "Shoot the president, will you?" Interesting. Interesting. It was something like 11 more hours before Oswald was charged with the crime. There's Oswald, the only color picture of Oswald that we have. And the color of his shirt. Oswald is arrested. He is thrown into the back of a police car. I found it always very, very amazing that the President of the United States has just been shot. A police officer has just been shot. And 52 policemen show up to arrest a man for sneaking into a theater and not paying a 75% admission fee. Even more curious than that is there's a police station literally around the corner from the theater. But all of the arresting officers came from downtown Dallas. Interesting point. Lee Harvey Oswald, one man alone, faced all of this. But amazingly self-assured, amazingly in control. The police officer said it was funny. It was as if he was dealing with them instead of the other way around. Amazingly self-assured. Not aware that he himself was now being stopped. Jack Ruby, two-bit hood, nightclub owner. As we all know historically, shot Lee Harvey Oswald Sunday morning in the jail. Who would expect to see a picture of him Sunday morning? This wasn't taken Sunday morning. This was in the jail. This was Friday night. There are pictures of Jack Ruby Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in the Dallas jail. He had total access to Oswald anytime he wanted. But here on Sunday morning, Jack Ruby's back again, facing the crowd. With his trademark fedora hat, terrible haircut. And Lee Harvey Oswald is being led out from this door here, coming through in a matter of seconds. And as it comes through, Jack Ruby leaps forward and silences the alleged assassin on national television. First public execution, broadcast live on national television. Let's look at Jack Ruby for just a second.
I want you to plant this image in your mind for a few minutes. We'll get back to this in a little bit. But notice this haircut, fedora hat, the off-balance walk, the white socks, the whole bit. Just sort of remember that. Plant that aside for a minute. We see Jack Ruby silent on best witness. A person who could have answered quite a few questions. Who was Jack Ruby? We're told, here's a man who's such a patriotic American who couldn't stand the thought of Mrs. Kennedy having to survive the horror of the trial. And out of sympathy for her and the kids, silences the SOB who killed her husband. That's what we're told. But we now know that that was invented. That story was invented by Tom Howell, Jack Ruby's first attorney. It was an absolute lie. This civic-minded citizen had been raised right here in Chicago. In this city as a child, here we have numbers for Jay Cusick, Al Capone, Frank Ginn. He could have been an advisor on the Untouchable. Jack Ruby was involved in this city in 1939 in the murder of a man named Leon Cook. He was the secretary of the Garbage Handlers Union. Mr. Cook's murder has been considered by organized crime experts as the point where the mob took over the Garbage Handlers Union. The FBI told the Warren Commission they could find absolutely no links between Jack Ruby and organized crime. Well, maybe they couldn't. We could. Jack Ruby's picture and name, his real name, Jacob Rubenstein, Jack Rubenstein, appears on the front page of the Chicago Sun when he was arrested and brought into question. We could find it, the FBI could. Interesting. Anyway, Jack goes to Dallas, becomes a mom's man there. Nothing gets done in Dallas. You don't do anything unless you hear from Jack first. By the way, let's get back to Jack Ruby for just a half a second. For those of you who saw any of the Arts and Entertainment special with Bill Kennedy, a very important witness, a Dallas policeman by the name of Billy Graham, was questioned on that show, on one of the episodes. And he said that Jack Ruby called him the night before the assassination. The way it happened was this. Billy Graham was manning the phones at police headquarters. The phone rings. Hello? The voice at the end of the phone says, Bill, if you move Oswald tomorrow the way you're planning, we will kill him. We will kill him. Well, the man at the end of the phone didn't identify himself, but Billy Graham knew he knew the voice. He'd known Jack Ruby for years. Anyway, he reported the call, goes home the next morning, when his shift is over, goes to bed. Wakes up Sunday afternoon, turns on the TV and sees the videotape replays of the shooting of Oswald. Then and only then does he put the voice and the name and the face together. Jack Ruby called Billy Graham and warned him it was going to happen. If Ruby had planned on shooting Oswald, if he'd have wanted to do it, why would he warn him? He'd want the element of surprise. The answer is this. Jack Ruby did not want to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald. He was ordered to do it by mob superiors. They made him the proverbial offer he couldn't refuse. These photographs have been universally condemned by photographing experts around the country as being forgeries, mistakes, around the world, Canada, England, United States. I testified for quite a while before the House Assassinations Committee about these photographs. They actually, the photographic panel created a series of phony photographs that were supposed to look And certain members created photographs that were real that looked like fakes. Fakes that looked real. Fakes that looked like fakes, and real ones that looked like real ones. And they all worked separately. They presented what they came up with at a meeting, a full meeting of the photographic panel, and I was asked to be part of that panel. And out of all these photographic experts, the best the country's got to offer, we all took the same test. The test was to determine which were real and which were faked. Out of the entire 19 members, I was the only one who scored 100% on the test. Yet when I told them that these pictures are fake, they said I was crazy. That they knew better than I did. When you compare these two photographs, which by the way were found in Oswald's garage in Irving, Texas, when you blow these up so that these two heads are exactly the same size, you find that this body is about 5.5 to 6 inches taller than this one. When you compare the bodies so they're the same height, then you find the heads are the wrong size. They don't match up. The known length of the rifle, which is in the was found allegedly in the depository, which has turned up in the National Archives, is a known length. When you compare that length, the ratio of that length to the height of Oswald in either picture, it's wrong in both cases. The shadows are wrong. All the shadows are diagonal, except under Oswald's face, where they're vertical, and on and on and on. But the most damning part of this is the actual face itself. Excuse me. Oswald's neck comes up to a specific point. There's a little notch. It goes out a little bit and then continues up. See, it doesn't quite match. It's a little off. But from that point, across the chin, there is a crop mark. Until you get to this dark area here, this is airbrush, and there is absolutely no neck. There's no edge to the face at all. I presented this to the House Committee and said, oh, it's easy. Oswald had chin acting. Look at his eyes. They're cross-eyed. There's a lot of problems with this picture. When you increase the contrast, when you use a technique to increase the contrast, this line through the neck becomes very, very apparent. Sticks out even more. When Oswald was arrested, there were some photographs taken of him. This is him. Pointed chin with a cleft in it. Not particularly muscular neck. But the man in the photographs doesn't have a pointed chin with a cleft. He has a square chin. And a far more muscular neck. Either Lee Harvey Oswald is the world's first chin transplant, or we have a phony photograph. I'll let you make up your mind as to which. The purpose of the pictures, by the way, was to establish Oswald as the person who could be connected with the rifle that was supposed to be used in the murder of the president, the pistol used in the killing of Officer Tippit, and for good measure, two socialist newspapers, the Militant and the Daily Worker. God was a commie, of course he killed the president. Oswald looked guilty. He was the perfect patsy. He looked guilty of anything. It didn't matter what you're accused of. You've all seen JFK, a movie which I dearly love and was proud to be a part of. The story of this man, Jim Garrison. This is the real Jim Garrison. Jim Garrison, you're familiar with the story, so I won't belabor the issue, but Jim had discovered that there was a connection between Lee Harvey Oswald and New Orleans. And he investigated that, and during his investigation he found that there was a connection to a gentleman by the name of David Ferrick. And it makes Joe Pesci look like Kevin Costner. David Ferrick was a very strange character. He didn't have a single hair on his body. I mean, talking about his one thing, but I've recently seen his autopsy some photographs, and believe me, bizarre looking character. David Ferrie was about to be arrested when he turned up sort of dead. 2 tight, unsigned suicide notes, empty pill containers all around his apartment. Coroner ruled with natural causes. Oh. Jim Garrison had no one to prosecute. Almost. During the investigation, he had heard testimony and people come forward and spoken to him about a man by the name of Clay Bertrand, or Clem Bertrand, who had attempted to hire an attorney by the name of Dean Andrews to defend Lee Harvey Oswald. And the question is, why would anybody care to hire somebody to defend a man who was accused of killing the president? Somebody who allegedly didn't know. So now Jim Garrison has a new target. And that target is Clay Shaw. A well-respected New Orleans businessman, a fetus, man of very bizarre tastes. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. During the trial, among other things, Shaw testified that he had never met David Ferrie. He never knew David Ferrie. Or Lee Harvey Oswald. This photograph was taken at a party in New Orleans. This is Clay Shaw, that's David Ferrie. Together. Shaw lied under oath about knowing Ferrie. Not once, twice. Guy with a mop on his head or a wig or whatever the hell it is Clay Shaw. The man on the left is David Ferrie. They were together more than once. They did know each other. Did Shaw know Oswald? More difficult to prove. WDSU TV in New Orleans took an amazing, important little piece of film footage of a man who called them up and said, I'm going to be handing out socialist literature. Come take pictures of me. You try that sometime. You know, the press conference here. Try to get the press to come. It's very, very difficult. But they came for him. Here he is, handing out Fair Play for Cuba Committee literature. It says, hands off Cuba. Fair Play for Cuba Committee, 544 Camp Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole member of the New Orleans chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Here he is handing out the literature. Oswald didn't have enough money to pay his own rent. He didn't have enough money to do anything, but he could afford to have several thousand handbills printed up and hire 3 people to help him hand out the literature. And here on the last slide, before we change to the next slide tray, we have Lee Harvey Oswald and, of all people, Clay Shaw in the same photograph. Clay Shaw had a rather strange walk, described as a cross between a limp and a swish. I've shown this film to people who knew Shaw. They said beyond question it's him. It's not particularly odd to find him here because behind this man's head is the doorway, the entrance to Clay Shaw's office. It's not a problem, except what are the odds of Shaw and Ferrie being in the same film sequence at the same time? If they allegedly didn't know each other. Here's Shaw, here's Oswald. And as the sequence gets closer to the end, we see the doorway of Shaw's office. Oswald is now looking up. And Shaw enters his office, and Oswald starts walking down the street. It's not proof they knew each other, but it's a strong indication. Of all the places in the world, isn't it amazing that Oswald would pick that particular spot to hand out his literature? There were other arrests made in Dealey Plaza. 3 tramps who we've become very familiar with in the last several months because there's been so much about them papers and the scandal keeps around the country. A man by the name of Lee Bowers was in this railroad tower, and at the time of the shoot, he noticed activity going on here behind the stockade fence. His job was controlling these trains from that railroad tower, and he realized that the train was taken off, a freight train, that had not been searched by the police. He stopped the train was searched, and these three men were arrested on one of the cars. They were marched across the front of the depository building, diagonally across the street, and into the jail. A lot has been said about these guys for years. Some people thought it was E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis, and an unidentified man. People thought it was two other people, three other people, and again kept changing. And quite frankly, now we have so many suspects, we don't know where to turn. The one thing that we can pretty much rely upon, and this picture's backwards, unfortunately. I did this one. You can see we have a rear projection system, and we turn all of them around. I screwed this one up, I'm sorry. But this man here is a man we're most concerned with. This guy is still pretty much unidentified, unless you listen to some of the newer theories, which may or may not be right. This man may be Fred Lee Chrisman, an alt-right fanatic who hated John Kennedy. But this man we're most concerned with because he has been identified as Charles Harrelson. Charles Harrelson is now serving a life sentence for the murder of federal judge John Wood. When Harrelson was arrested, he claimed to be one of the Kennedy assassins. Offered to turn state's evidence in exchange for waiver of immunity. He would testify about both murders. The government didn't want to hear what he had to say. Harrelson was tried, convicted, and is now serving a life sentence for the murder of Judge Wood. 2 years ago, Bernard Fensterwall, late Fensterwall, went to visit Mr. Harrelson in the federal penitentiary. Mr. Harrelson said, "It wasn't me. I didn't have anything to do with Kennedy killing. But if I ever get out of this jail, my memory may improve." I'd like to find out what he has to say. This is Willie Augustus Somerset, FBI informant, Miami police informant. 13 days before the assassination of President Kennedy, 13 days before the assassination, a full 2 weeks before Dallas, Willie Somerset set up a tape recorder in his apartment. He and Charles sat and a few other people from the Miami Police Department, Criminal Investigation Bureau. And they tape recorded a conversation between Somerset and this man, Joseph Adams Miltier. Joseph Miltier was described as being one of the most dangerous men in America. He looks like Santa Claus. This man spent his life as a hater. He belonged to the Ku Klux Klan, the National States' Rights Party, the National White People's Council, and he hated John Kennedy. He spent years writing anti-Kennedy literature. And during this amazing conversation that was being taped, and the tape still exists, Miltier described how John Kennedy would be killed. That a rifle would be broken down and taken into an office building, used for the murder, and a Patsy would be picked up and thrown to the police in the front of the car. Sound familiar? This is a page from the FBI files on Miltier. Is it not amazing that all the people who could be mentioned in this document, which was done in 1964 by the FBI, the other two names mentioned in the document are Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, 5 years before they would be killed. This is one page that was withheld. The FBI had this file, they turned it over to the Warren Commission, during the closing days, final week of the Commission's life. On the day of the assassination, Joseph Miltier called William Somerset from Dallas and said, "After today, you'll never see your friend Kennedy in Florida again." John Kennedy, less than a minute before his head was blown off. Joseph Miltier on Houston Street. He hated John Kennedy so much, he had to go there and witness the assassination. Miltier in the plaza on the left, Miltier at home. There was a teletype. Teletype was sent, it was mentioned in JFK, and it relates to FBI informants, and FBI special agents checking with their informants about possible hate group members that might be involved in an assassination attempt. All of that was a result of the Miltier tape. The lady in the background has become known as the Babushka lady. She's taking a motion picture of the assassination. There are two things that are completely unique about this. Number one, the fact that we've never seen it. I have all the other films of the assassination. It's the only one we don't have. And from where she was standing, as she filmed President being hit, in the background was the grassy knoll. This is Charles Groden, witness who's standing close to the president, his son. This is the Babushka lady. This is Jean Hill. And this is Mary Mormon. Mary Mormon is taking a Polaroid photograph. You'll see in just a moment. Emmett Hudson and two other people, groundskeepers on the knoll. Two days after the assassination, the Babushka lady, whose name is Beverly Oliver, that's open to debate. Some people disagree. Beverly says that it's her. I believe it is. Other people think maybe it's not. But Beverly came to work. She was carrying a makeup case. And she worked at the strip club right next to Jack Ruby's. She was a singer, an entertainer. And as she walked up to the first landing, she was stopped by two men. He was one of them. His name is Regis Kennedy, no relation to the president. He was an FBI agent on loan from the New Orleans office to the Dallas office for the Kennedy investigation. Regis Kennedy confiscated Beverly's film, told her it was important, it would be used for evidence, a copy would be made, and the original would be returned to her. She never saw either Kennedy or the film again. For over a decade and a half, we have been trying to get the FBI to let us see the film. The response to the Freedom of Information Act request is the film in question is not in our possession at this moment. What the hell does that mean? Does that mean that they shipped it from that office to another office so they can deny they have it and they'll get it back tomorrow? This is going on for nearly 30 years. This character is Eugene Hale Groden. Mr. Brady, at the time of the assassination of President Kennedy, was on parole in Los Angeles. And he turned up in Dealey Plaza and he was arrested. He was arrested coming out of the Dow Tex building, the same building that Abraham Zapruder had his office, directly across the street from the depository. Mr. Brady gave a false name to the police. Bill, are you here? Bill Kelly? Bill's done a lot of work on this character. This guy has an arrest record as long as your arm. He was arrested in the 1940s for counterfeiting World War II ration stamps. It goes on and on and on in many states. But he was arrested in Dealey Plaza as a suspect in the murder of President Kennedy. He gave a false name to the police and was released. Goes back home. Where's home? Los Angeles. What's his job? He launders money for the mob. Where do we see him again? 5 years later, in the Ambassador Hotel room when Robert Kennedy was shot. One man with mob connections present at both Kennedy murders. Coincidence? The hell it was. This guy's a player, man. If there's another investigation, I think we should look into it. Again, the House Committee did. I don't. Spent a lot of time on this guy. You can look, if you're ever lucky enough to find one of the few remaining copies. There were only 1,000 sets in the first place. Most of them have been burned or destroyed. But the House Committee volumes, there's probably less than 200 sets in the world. And they range in thickness. So the most important ones are about yay thick. The one on organized crime is the thickest one. It's massive. Massive. Virtually everything that Blakey and Company did to deal with organized crime, except the file on this guy. It's missing. It's not there. It's among those files that we want declassified now. That's why it's such a tremendous move now to get this stuff declassified. Bill is one of the leaders of this movement. John Judge and the rest of the guys who are doing such great work to get the files declassified. That's why it's important. What did the government know? What did they have to say about a son of a bitch like this? That's what I want to know. And talk about sons of bitches. Old Lindenberg being sworn in on Air Force One. Solemn. Official picture, really. Down there, Mrs. Kennedy, poor lady, totally in shock. Lady Bird, I'm Lady Bird. Congressman Thomas in the background, looking as solemn as Lindenberg. Until we get to the next picture. Yeah. You ever seen such a shady grin in your life? Look at this. Look at this. What did they know? When did they know it? Years before Watergate.
Isn't Chief Curry in that photograph?
Yeah, Chief Curry was on the right-hand side. So was Jack Valenti, a man who condemned JFK. He was on the plane. He's right there to the right. You can't see him here, unfortunately. He's popped out. But they're here. They're in this series. They're both in that set.
Between LBJ's hand and his face, you can see that.
Yeah, there's Chief Curry, and Jack Valenti's over on the right. They're there.
Who's the man winking?
The man winking is Congressman Thomas, a man who President Kennedy did the benefit for that morning, the speech for that morning.
Is Curry the relative that got arrested down in the police force?
He is the one who ran it. He's the Chief Police Jesse Curry. Anyway, let's go on with this, and I'll have plenty of time to answer your questions later. That was a good observation. I appreciate that. We've gone through the issues of this photograph, which are really incredible. The House Committee had this photograph, presented it for the first time. I got to work on the original, thank God, because along with the Nix film, now the original of this has disappeared too. The only remaining copies are the ones in my possession. There is somebody in that window.
Could you outline that first?
Yeah. The boxes are the white, brown, or tan areas here. And the person that's in the window goes back up like this. Now, our normal feel for a window relates to a window coming up about yay high. But the base of this window frame is only 8 inches above the floor. So this may not be an arm, this may be a leg of somebody standing there going back into the shadows, or it could be somebody crouching down, because there does appear to be some kind of a facial feature here in the window. There's something reflecting right on here. We can't tell what it is. Some work has to be done on this.
That's still a Powell picture?
This is still powerful.
Why would an Army intelligence man make that kind of picture available?
Why would he? He didn't make it available. Powell took the photograph, it was handed to the FBI, and they sat on this for 15 years. The House committee finally got it declassified because they heard about it and they wanted to see what it showed. It had been released earlier. Excuse me, a researcher in Tennessee by the name of Wallace Milam had sued the FBI under the Freedom of Information Act and received a very poor quality black and white print. Nobody even knew it existed in color. I got to do this work for the committee, and they buried it. But beyond that, there's other very important evidence relating to the windows. You may have heard of the Bronson film. Film taken by Charles Bronson, and no, I don't mean that Death Wish. This is a different one. What you're seeing here, this crazy quilt that we're viewing here, is the 6th floor of the depository 5 minutes before the shooting. I'm sorry, 6 minutes before the shooting. It's the 6th and the 5th floors. Here's the 5th floor, here's the 6th floor. 6 minutes before the shooting, there was an epileptic seizure, which is graphically displayed in JFK. Charles Bronson, who was standing at the corner of Houston and Maine, aimed his camera toward the depository point. Why? There was a commotion going on there, excuse me, at the corner of Elm and Houston. He had a camera that was not a reflex camera. That is, it's not what you see is what you get. What you see is what you get. The reflex camera is you're viewing what the camera is seeing. That was not the kind of camera that Mr. Bronson had. And he switched, it was a turret camera with 3 lenses. He had started at the normal lens and he thought he was twisting to the telephoto lens so he could zoom in and get the victim of this epileptic seizure being put into an ambulance. But he twisted the wrong way and went to wide angle. And in the extreme upper left-hand corner of the film frame, and I'll give you an idea of how much of a blow-up this is. This is the flat edge of the mask for the camera. This I shot through a microscope. The entire area that you see here is smaller than the point of the pin, not the head of the pin, the point of the pin. And I blew this up to 35 millimeter, and I rephotographed it and made a new version of the film based on this and ran it in motion, and you can see movement in all 3 of these corner windows on the 6th floor simultaneously. Think of this. This was 6 minutes before the shooting. At the exact moment that Oswald was being seen on the 2nd floor in the lunchroom prior to the shooting by Kathleen Arms. Three people at the same time. Want to see the movement? I'm going to go back and forth about 20 times. Look at any one of those 3 windows between the 2 frames I'm going to show you, and then look at another one, and then look at another one, and watch the movement consecutively. And all 3 of the windows. It doesn't matter which one you look at, there's movement in them. Remember I told you that President Kennedy was 6 minutes late because he stayed at the airport? At the point this was taken, was supposed to be the exact moment the President was due to go by. Oswald had a witness that he was on the 5th floor, on the 2nd floor at the time this was taken. Jerry Polygoff, you still here? I just walked out the door a few minutes ago. We held a press conference in Washington, D.C. just before the House committee broke up. We presented this film to the press. The copyright owner of the film and not want the film released with any political statement attached to it. They allowed us to show it, they wouldn't let the press duplicate it. We did it that way because we didn't want Professor Blakey to be able to bury something else. We brought it to the public first, and then we took it to the committee, and the committee was stuck. They sent it to the Aerospace Center in California. They digitized key frames of the sequence. Did something called image deblurring, which is they photograph 3 good shots, they make a matrix, and disregard those things that are non-constants within the frame. And they were left with a hard copy image, much sharper than you see here, much less grainy, which shows 3 people on the 6th floor. And Blakey was stuck. When the House Committee released their report and their volumes of recommendations to the Justice Department, they pleaded with the Justice Department to continue the work on this film. To this day, they haven't lifted a finger. The government still hasn't touched this film. This photograph was taken by Tom Dillard. He was in the motorcade, in the press car. He looked up after the shooting, and he shot a picture of the entire wall of the depository, including Elsie Dorman here on the 4th floor, shooting a film from the depository as the president approached. And you'll be seeing that in just a few minutes.
Can I take a big time? On this picture here, we have fire escape. Something on the right.
Yeah, fire escape.
Well, in that picture you showed American Military Intelligence Army, I couldn't see the first.
That's there, System Deep Shadow. Listen, I'm going to ask you not to interrupt. I'll be glad to answer your questions. Here's the picture. Whoops. The fire escape is in deep shadow here. It's there. You can see the fire escape coming down. It is there. I mean, I don't need to do that, but I don't want to hold anybody else up. I'll be glad to answer any questions you got. Anyway, this photograph appeared this way in the Warren volumes. It appeared in newspapers, magazines, books all over the country. We all assumed that this is the way it was supposed to be, that this was the photograph. It's not. The staff photographic consultant of the House Assassinations Committee, I asked to review everything they had. I was brought down there on a Sunday, and I can't even remember what it was for one day, and I passed by a room, and on the table in the room was a pile of envelopes full of photographs. And I asked what it was. It's going back to Life magazine. It's nothing there of any importance. Forget about it. I said, what are you seeing? And I did. I looked at every one of those 2,000 to 3,000 photographs. And among the photographs were a couple of strips of negatives, including the negative, the original negative for this photograph. And when I looked at them, I was like, what happened to this thing? Look at the condition this is in. What you're seeing here, for those of you back here, you may not be able to see it, maybe you can. There's little tiny lines, break lines through the entire picture. Those lines are called reticulation. Reticulation usually only happens to film when it's processed in excessive heat. The emulsion cracks. But we knew that that didn't happen on these because we had clear copies of them. So I asked what happened. The House Assassinations Committee took the 2 strips of Dillard photographs, because he had 2 cameras, and they coated them with a radioactive substance to try out a new technique, nuclear photographic analysis. The coating is supposed to remain on the film for no longer than 10 hours maximum. They left it on for a year. These got so hot, so radioactive, that the emulsion started to peel off. It got soft and started to peel off in areas. And the other photograph, you see nothing but a gigantic smudge. But why is this so important? Because, remember the original photograph? You can't see the final pair of windows. But on the original negative, you can see the final part of the final pair, right up to the edge of the negative, which is that little black area. The white area is open in. This area here is the 6th floor window at the opposite end of the depository. And when you open the exposure on this and look into those windows, you can see lights on the ceilings in the background, but in this window, we see more. We look in that window, and there's somebody still there. 15 seconds after the shooting, there is a shape in the window. There's a light on the ceiling over his shoulder, chin, nose, eyes, forehead, and hair. No, it's exactly the size of the human being. Exactly. The window's only open halfway. It's open even less than the Oswald window. There is somebody on the 6th floor at the opposite end. Now, I didn't realize that until after the House Committee broke up, because I was doing more work on it after they broke up. They lent me the original negatives when they were there. I was just trying to work on it and made the discovery later. There's some second person on the 6th floor. If there's ever another investigation, that must be looked into. Must be. Because that's clearly not Lee Harvey Oswald. What that is a person at the exact spot for a shot that exactly matches the angle that hit Governor Connolly, and the shot that struck the north curve of Main Street, the one I showed you before. Finally, the last part of the slide presentation, before we get to the videotape, I know you must be getting awfully restless, is the area of the grassy knoll. What about the knoll? Well, the fact that 80% of the witnesses said that the shots came from the knoll is a key point of this investigation. The fact that immediately after the shooting, the police were aware of it and started running up the knoll and paying attention to it. Well, this is interesting. The people who were there thought the shots came from there, including Chief of Police Curry, and Sheriff Bill Decker, both of whom said on the Dallas Police radio, get people up there into that parking lot, see what's going on up there. But look at this somewhat amazing photograph for a moment. The policeman who was on the street a few moments ago is now up here along with other members of the crowd, and they're all looking over the fence. All of them except this guy. Anybody recognize him? He's pretty far away.
Robert McNeil.
That's right, Robert McNeil, from the Neil Lear report. He was in the press car and he ran up there. Who was a press and police hanger-on? Who needed to be known and be friends with all the police? Jack Ruby. The one man who's not looking over the knoll or paying attention up here or over the fence is McNeil. McNeil is looking at this man. Remember the picture of Jack Ruby when he shot Oswald, that off-balance look, the white socks, that horrible haircut, the fedora hat? This may very well be Jack Ruby. He looks too much like him not to be considered to be Ruby. Seth Cantor, who was a friend of Ruby, who met Ruby at Parkland Hospital later that afternoon, just about a half an hour after this picture was taken. I've shown him this picture, and he's convinced that might very well be Ruby. Jean Hill testified, and you can see her testimony in JFK, that she saw a man running from the front of the depository toward the knoll, exactly like this. This may very well be Ruby. Interesting thing about this photograph is that it shows McNeil. Because McNeil, who believes the Warren report and backs it, testifies and has said openly that after the shooting, he ran into the depository to try to find a telephone. And as he ran in, who did he encounter? Lee Harvey Oswald, as Oswald was leaving. We're left with the impression that Oswald ran out of the building right away there. One must imagine how much time it took for McNeil to run out of the press car, all the way up the knoll, to this point, to be within a crowd, then go all the way back toward the depository and walk in. What does this mean? Oswald didn't rush out of the depository. He took his time. But the witnesses ran up the middle. Witnesses didn't go to the depository. They knew where the shots came from. I asked Gene Hill. Gene Hill's the lady in the red coat up there, who was leading the crowd. I asked her, I said, you know, the guy was armed. What are you doing? He said, all I could think of is, this was the guy who killed the president. We couldn't let him get away. And they all felt the same way. You'll see this in motion when we see the video clip in a few minutes. This photograph was taken by Philip Willis. You saw Philip Willis at the very beginning of the presentation. He was looking at the president was looking at him. This after he's gone past the president. The arrow points to the president. This is the road sign, this is the umbrella man. Here's Abraham Zapruder, the Secretary Marilyn Sitzman. And at the end of this retaining wall, here's the stockade fence, the darker area. The light area in the front is the retaining wall. At the end of the retaining wall is a dark, mysterious figure. This figure was called by the House Assassinations Committee the Black Dog Man, because he looks like a Cocker Spaniel sitting on the wall. All you can see is the upper part of his body. When you look carefully, you can see the skin tone of his face. He's Caucasian. He's wearing a dark brown or black raincoat. Well, Gene Hill described chasing a man in a brown raincoat back into the parking lot area from this point. Well, any other pictures of this guy up here? Yeah. This picture was taken by Hugh Betzner a few moments after the shooting. A few moments before the shooting. Literally seconds. Here's the president. There's a road sign. There's the umbrella man's umbrella. There's Zapruder and Sitzman. There's Howard Campbell-Bush in the way between Zapruder. And here's the man at the end of the retaining wall. This is very good because it establishes the distance between Zapruder and this man, because we'll discuss him again in just a second. Zapruder, Howard Campbell-Bush, and at the end of the wall, 54 feet away, the Black Dog Man. In the film taken by Marie Muchmore, the moment just before the headshot right here, at the area over the wall, we see the man's shoulders, and that's the top of the frame. There's nothing above that that we can see on the film. And in the Nix film, this is a frame of a blow in the Nix film, we can see this area over the wall, and the shape is there. In the Nix film, in copies I did, just before the House committee existed, I presented this stuff. They wouldn't listen to me. I said there's movement over that wall, and there is. And some of you researchers who know me have seen my work on this. There is somebody, the shape is going down like this at the moment of the shooting, something like that. And I wanted to get my hands on the original Nix film to do work from the original again. The problem with the Nix film is it's slightly overexposed. And because it's overexposed, we had to darken it a little bit to get a natural skin tone to the president. Otherwise, he flares up. The idea is to do that. This is before we realized everything was up there. But when you do that, you create something called blocking, where you block in the shadows. Things that are up there disappear. By the time I realized that there was somebody up there in movement, I no longer had the original film in my hands. They had gone back to UPI and on to the House committee. Committee would never let me touch the original film. I'm kind of glad about that now. Since they lost it, they can't blame me for it. There was somebody up there and somebody in motion, and it is the Black Dog Man. And a few moments later, he's gone. In the next Willis slide, he's no longer there. This is what the area looked like then. It's what it looks like now. Abraham Zapruder was standing on the edge of this little abutment here. It's a pedestal. Here's the Howard Campbell tree. And if you go down to the Dealey Plaza now, unfortunately the tree's no longer there. It had grown so large that for JFK we had to have it removed. And we put in another tree that's about the same size, but it's no longer a Howard Campbell, unfortunately. But at the end of the retaining wall is where the Black Dog Man was, behind the wall here. Behind him there's nothing except the stockade fence. You had Emmett Hudson and his two friends down here. Zapruder was there, but facing the other direction. President's going by on the street below. Nobody was looking up there. There was someone up there. It was the closest point of cover at the moment of the shoot. This is frame 413 of the Zapruder film. It is one frame of 18 separate frames that shows the back of a man's head at the bottom of the frame. Blow this up a little bit, make it a little lighter, and you can see the skin tone veneer, shape of the head, and what looks like some kind of a military helmet of some sort. It's not. All of these white areas are leaves on the tree, on the power canopy tree that's right in front of the camera. That's why they're so far out of focus. The shape of the head is clear. Now, I testified before this to the Rockefeller Commission. The Rockefeller Commission and the FBI photo people told me I was nuts. If you read the report, they say there's nobody there. But the House Assassinations Committee, that was just as conservative, admitted that I was right. And they went beyond me. I was talking about a man being here. What I was worried about was this rifle shape emanating from his hands. Barrel, stock, rear sight, front sight. Might be an illusion. I don't know. It's not part of the tree because it's too far away. It's too much in focus. But the House Committee went beyond what I found. In the Willis photograph, which is somewhat of a blur, they used computer enhancement to de-blur it, and they found the same rifle shape in another photograph. But they weren't willing to say it's a rifle. Neither am I. I'm saying is there's something there that needs to be examined. We still don't know what it was. This photograph was taken by Mary Norman at the moment of the shooting, the moment of the head explosion. Here's the president, Mrs. Kennedy, Emmett Hudson and his friends, Zapruder, Sitzman, the tree. At the end of the retaining wall is the shape, the front of the face of the black belt man. Still there, at the moment of the shooting. Well, I sent another researcher, Gary Mack, a copy of this picture years later, after I made that discovery. We were talking about some other issue. I just included it in the package I was sending. He and Jack White were examining the photograph. They found the most interesting character. And for any of you who saw the first episode and the second episode of The Men Who Killed Kennedy, you know about the badge man. The badge man is this shape here behind. Here's the top of the stockade fence over the retaining wall. And here's a shape of somebody that appears to be a man. It appears to be somebody in a police uniform. Shoulder patch, badge, head, constable shoes, glasses. It's difficult to see. I didn't see it for years. The first person to ever see this shape was a very, very wonderful lady by the name of Ruth Stapleton. You know the name, you know what I'm talking about. President Carter's sister. I showed this to her along with the whole presentation you're seeing today. She was the first person to see this badge man. But when Jack and Gary started working on this, Jack said that it was difficult for people to see this, and it is, so he colorized it. He didn't draw in any edges. He simply colorized it to highlight those areas. It's just as clear in black and white, but there is an image there. Whether it's a badge man or whether it's a random pattern of shadow and light, we honestly don't know yet. But it's something that really needs to be examined. And everybody in this country who has dealt with it, MIT, all the others, have been so afraid of what they found that they won't release a report on it. Immediately after the shooting, witnesses ran back. You'll see it in motion in probably about 3 or 4 minutes now. At the end of the retaining wall, the man who was there left a bottle of Coca-Cola sitting on the edge of the wall. And this is the second witness to race up there to see what was going on. He's running between the retaining wall and the stockade fence, but there was someone there ahead of him. This fellow, the very first person to get up there. If any living human being saw what happened to the man who ran back from the corner of the retaining wall, the black dog man, ran back back into that parking lot. If anyone saw what happened to him, this man did. But in 29 years, this witness has still not been identified. If he saw something, we can't prove it. The photograph that was taken at the moment of the assassination of President Kennedy, unfortunately, is very grainy. In fact, it's grainier than any other photograph taken in the series. She took 5. This is the only one with this amount of grain. In some copies of this photograph, the edge of the wall appears, as it does here, to be concave. In other areas, other photographs, it appears to be convex. The flat edge at no time ever appears totally flat. But beyond that, there's still a lot to be learned from this photograph, because during the House Assassinations Committee panel hearings, it was discovered that an audio tape existed at the moment of the shooting. Dallas Police Tape, channel number 1. It was hypothesized by researcher Gary Mack that perhaps, if indeed that tape recording, which all you can hear on the tape recording, by the way, is a motorcycle engine. He said, suppose that motorcycle engine is on a police motorcycle in the motorcade. Well, Professor Blakey thought this was absolutely ludicrous. It's ridiculous. How could it possibly be? So it makes it look like he's doing something positive to the investigation. And he sends the tape on to both Baranek and Newman in Chicago. They do an analysis of this tape, and they find that there is, from what they had discovered, a man firing from 8 feet to the west of the corner of the stockade fence. And there's the shape over the wall, the exact spot where the acoustics people said it would be. I just realized I'm running a little bit behind time, and we must see that tape, so we have one slide I decided to do on the call, but it's not a key one. What happened to President Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963? We don't know all the answers. We know a lot more now than we ever knew before. And if we keep pressing, we may know a great deal more. We are now watching the videotape without a break. We'll go through it. The videotape is about 20 minutes. I'm sorry to hold you up that much longer. I think it's worth a while. Okay. Motorcade at the outskirts of Dallas. Very friendly crowd, 10, 12, 15 thick. On Main Street, approaching Gilley Plaza. The lead motorcycle is turning on to Houston Street. The president's car into the turn. The limousine heading north on Houston Street to the corner of Elm, where the depository building is located. And this scene shot from the depository as the president approached. The president into the turn on the Elm. We have to find a little louder.
President's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark. I was on 7th Freeway earlier, even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators.
The sound is recreated. I'll explain that later. The shots you heard were fired in Gilley Plaza during the acoustics testing, and the pattern was from a computer readout. car instead of the president. I'm pulling back a little bit. Notice the direction of travel as the president is struck. Now the witnesses in the plaza, watch their reaction.
But if different people right up the hill, alongside Elm Street, there by the 7th Freeway, several police officers are approaching up the hill at this time, stand by.
Now the announcement of the president's death.
Died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time. He died of gunshot wound in the brain, right to the head.
From the front. Now witnesses in the
The
plaza.
headshot seemed to come from the right front. It seemed to strike him here, and his head went back, and all of the brain matter went out the back of the head. It was like a red halo, a red circle with bright matter in the middle of it. It just went like that. The particular headshot must have come from another direction beside and behind him, because the back of his head blew off, and it doesn't make sense to be hit from the rear and still have your face intact. So he must have been hit from another position, possibly in the front, but the back of his head blew off.
So I'm very dead certain at least one shot, including the one that took the president's skull off, had to come from the right front. And I'll stand by that to my death. Over my mother's grave.
When I first heard a noise, I was not aware that that was a shot being fired, and maybe perhaps that's why I continued to film, because I thought it was a backfire or a firecracker. I mean, I wasn't used to being around guns. I did not realize that those were shots until I saw in the frame of my camera President Kennedy's head come off, the back of his head, and I realized that that was a shot. I don't know how many I heard. I know where I thought the shots came from was the picket fence area, and that around that large tree somewhere on the other side of those steps, but in the picket fence area. There was a figure there, and there was smoke there. I will always believe that the man that shot President Kennedy was standing somewhere in the picket fence area, and no one will ever convince me any differently. I know what I saw.
The location of the head wound is key evidence, since a bullet almost always makes a small wound when it enters and a large wound when it exits. A big wound in the back of JFK's head would indicate a shot from the front, and more than one shooter. Most of the doctors and nurses who treated the president at Parkland did see a large wound at the rear of the head. Dr. Robert McClelland.
It was in the right back part of the head, very large, almost a fifth or perhaps even a quarter of the right back part of the head in this area here had been blasted out, along with probably most of the brain tissue. I could see the president's head wound quite well, and I was probably looking into a wound that was on the lateral or the side part of the head and the back part of the head. The only injuries that I really saw were the ones, or the very large one, in the back part, the right side of the head. And in that part of the head, the entire skull, that big around, segment that perhaps that big around, was blown away. And there were still segments of scalp attached around it. The large hole, I know was there.
He had a large, about 7 centimeter opening in the right occipital parietal area. A considerable portion of the brain was missing there, and the occipital cortex, the back portion of the brain, was lying down near the opening of the wound, and blood was trickling out. And it would be this portion of the head right here.
And some members like this.
Nurse Audrey Bell.
There was a massive wound at the back of his head.
Dr. Charles Carrico.
There was quite a large effect about here on his skull.
my impression was that there was a wound in this area of the head, right